Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, May the 24th. Let's get right to introducing our panel to you this week. Welcome to Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward. Eric Sondermann, columnist for Colorado Politics and the Colorado Springs and Denver Gazettes. Alayna Alvarez, reporter at Axios Denver. And Sage Nauman, columnist, commentator, and strategist and owner of Anthem Communications. Thanks to you all for joining us this week. Governor Polis is very busy these days going through all the bills passed by the legislature, and he doesn't like all of them, even some of the bills that were sponsored by fellow Democrats. So going into last week, at the very last minute, the governor vetoed 6 bills, and there's still the talk around town this week, especially among Democrats, Patty.
Well, yesterday there was a gathering in the afternoon at the Capitol to protest 2 of his vetoes, which were work-related labor bills. We had 705 bills introduced last session. Over 500 passed. So it's not a huge surprise that some of them might have flaws, and especially the ones that were going through at the end. And in his veto, Governor Polis was actually fairly extensive in saying why certain ones were vetoed. One of these labor bills worker bills involved whether you were forced to go to meetings if they were dealing with religious and political issues, as well as possibly union issues. And the wording was vague enough in these bills that it made sense for them to go, for it to be vetoed. There was also the one, however, about wage theft, which is a big concern in Denver. We're dealing with it with Urban Peak. And statewide, you think there could have been a compromise, but I think they were just moving too fast towards the end. So let's hope they come up with a solution, because people deserve to be paid for the work they do.
Eric.
Well, I don't think there's any argument that people deserve to be paid for the work they do. The question is, the devil's always in the details, and the details didn't add up here. I'd start my comments, Kyle, by just praising the governor. Thank God that there's someone around the Capitol who knows that there's a brake pedal to go along with the accelerator, because this legislature has been mainly accelerator. And out of these hundreds of bills, as Patty referenced, that have been passed, yes, he hit the brake pedal on 6 of them. That is not an overwhelming number. A lot of these bills have good intentions, and I don't think Governor Polis's argument is with the intentions. It's with the implementation and whether there is a better way of accomplishing that intention and that objective. And I'm glad to see his right hand getting a little exercise with the veto pen.
Okay, Alayna.
Something I find interesting is how not very well these vetoes are sitting with the Democratic Women's Caucus. So I learned from the Denver Post reporting that 18 of the 22 lawmakers sponsoring this vetoed legislation were women, and 2 of the bills that were vetoed were considered their priority bills. So unsurprisingly, the Democratic Women's Caucus is upset that their priorities aren't really aligning with Polis's. And he, of course, says that this isn't, as Eric said, it's not about the people behind the legislation. It's not that the fact that they're women. It's about the actual details of these policies and how it will shake out across the state. One thing that my team thought he was going to veto and didn't was a law that will seek to protect consumers from harm from the artificial intelligence industry. This AI bill has made a lot of news because it's one of the first of its kind, if not the first of its kind in the country. And we were surprised for a couple of reasons. One, just the fact who Polis is. He's a libertarian-leaning multimillionaire who's very tech-savvy, looks out for business interests. And 2, he had a lot of concerns with the bill, one being the fact that it could hinder innovation within an industry that's arguably doing a lot of good for the world. So we were surprised by that. It was interesting.
He made it clear he was reluctantly signing it, yeah. Sage.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about vetoes is, for those who aren't familiar with the legislative process and how this building works with the personalities that are there now, is that these are the bills that made it through, right? These are the bills that made it through the legislature, that they weren't killed in the backroom deals or weren't killed on the calendar because, the governor was back channeling, hey, I'm not signing this, don't send it to me. So the vetoes are always interesting because those are the ones that the legislature said, yeah, we don't really care about any warning signs we're getting, we're sending it to you anyways. With that being said, this division that we're seeing in the Democratic Democratic Party is going to become more pronounced as time goes on. This primary election is going to be substantial, especially for the Colorado House of Representatives, in regards to, does the Progressive Caucus grow larger? This election is going to really determine the direction the state goes. The one after this election will be even more interesting because, of course, we're going to have the governorship and a lot of others as well. But this is the division that we're seeing the Democratic Party, that the Republican Party has had for a long time, obviously on different ideological grounds. But now the Democratic Party is going through it, and a lot of people who are, I guess we would call them moderates now, but as was mentioned, Jared Polis is not a moderate. He's quite progressive. Can they maintain control, or will the Democratic Party lurch further to the left this year and in elections to come?
Okay, to play on that, let's talk about the rift within the Colorado GOP too. It's not just the Democrats, the Republicans, and I feel like this primary season is getting even more intense. Eric, let's start with you.
For years, I've waited for the Colorado Republican Party to hit bottom. It's almost in terms of an addiction, and with any addict, you have to hit bottom before you really make a commitment to getting well and getting healthy. I thought 2018, that had to be bottom, but nope, that wasn't bottom. Then there was 2020, and then there was 2022. I mean, Donald Trump loses his state by 14 points in 2020. Cory Gardner only loses by 9. This is a party that almost seems to have a death wish. You look at Dave Williams, who's an agent of much of this chaos. You look at some of the endorsements the state party has made. There's a guy named Janik Yoshi, who used to be in Colorado Springs. A lot of these people are carpetbaggers. He carpetbagged into an Adams County seat, and they endorsed him with the emphasis on doctor. Well, he's not even a doctor anymore. His medical license was revoked not that many years ago. Ron Hanks, when he's not blowing up copiers that he pretends are voting machines, is now the endorsed candidate on the Western Slope. And then, of course, you have Ms. Boebert out in her new district. Her little gambit of moving across the state is likely to work out. If you had a head-on-head race with one candidate against Boebert, they could beat her. But this is a divided field of 4 or 5 candidates. No one will get out for the greater good, and Boebert's going to coast to victory.
All of the antics coming out of the Colorado Republican Party are, at the end of the day, just fueling the fundraising game for Democrats. In a recent email, Democrats sent to support the Democratic Party sent to supporters saying, they've enjoyed the show from the GOP, but they can't even pretend to be surprised at this point anymore. And the GOP's theater just continues. So this week, their latest act was sending out an email, a fundraising email, calling on parents to pull their kids from public schools because Democrats are trying to turn their kids trans. This is, of course, related to a bill that was signed by Governor Polis that would require teachers to call students by their preferred pronouns without seeking permission or even notifying their guardians. If the GOP continues to carry on with this messaging, with these strategies, if that's what you want to call them, if they continue to keep Dave Williams at the top, it's just going to make it even harder for them to secure other seats that are outside of extremely safe, super red districts.
Curious to hear your thoughts, Sage.
Yeah, so the crazy thing is that all of the stars are aligning for Republicans to make some gains in some places in the state, but the state party is absolutely determined to not take advantage of them. You look at, we're going to talk about the mayor and his approval ratings in Denver. You look at, our ratings for crime and affordability and business friendliness. They're not good. They're worse than they were when Governor Polis took office, and in some cases substantially. But the Republican Party, the thing is that the rules have changed, right? When you lose a presidential election, for example, in the past, that was a time to inflect. You look in and you say, okay, what did we do wrong? What was wrong with our messaging? What were we focused on that was turning off certain voters, suburban women, for example? And instead, what the party has done, because of Donald Trump, has said, we didn't lose. We didn't lose anything. We actually won. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. And so there was no moment of learning and inflecting. And until the Republican Party recognizes that it's losing for a reason and it's legitimately losing, it's not going to turn itself around. That's the reason I'm not a member of the Republican Party anymore, because it's the party that I believe has it's abandoned conservatism and picked something else that I think is terrible.
Okay, Patty.
So you've got the Ron Hanks in the third, that is not going to be a winner for the Republicans. Jeff Hurd might be, and I'm not sure the endorsement is going to make that much difference in the Republican Party, because true Republicans and I would say that's not the party faithful. Let's assume that the people in power in the Republican Party don't speak for everyone, because if they do, the Republican Party is doomed. But I think Jeff Hurd still has a good chance for Lauren Boebert's old seat. Ron Hanks, let's hope there's no way. In the 8th, the former doctor getting endorsed is just not a good candidate, not smart politics, not the kind of people we want representing us in Washington. Even if they have different political viewpoints, we want someone who actually makes sense and is on the planet.
As Sage was referring to, in Denver, Mayor Mike Johnston and the city council are approaching the one-year mark together. And a poll has found approval ratings have dropped. In fact, Alayna, Axios Denver referred to it as Denver's are souring on the mayor and the council.
That's right. It was first reported by my colleague, John Frank. Of course, as we all know, it's important to take every poll with a grain of salt. And just some context on this one. This one came from Magellan Strategies. It surveyed about 1,600 general election voters earlier this month. We saw an approval rating for Mayor Johnston at about 43%, a disapproval rating of 50% for his performance to date. It was even lower, the approval rate for council, at about 36%. And what voters are generally saying is that they're concerned about the priorities that this administration has carried out so far. They are concerned about the way that his administration has spent money when it comes to the migrant crisis, homelessness, crime. And something else they said is that they're looking for new leadership and fresh ideas when it comes to addressing the city's challenges. Now, that part is where I raise an eyebrow a little bit, because it feels like every other day Mayor Johnston is introducing a new something, a new initiative, a new program. Just this month, he announced an Office of Neighborhood Safety, as was talked about here, and he also announced a new work program for teens to keep them busy and safe this summer. And now, that's not even counting in his asylum seeker program, his downtown safety program. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I think it kind of begs the question how engaged voters really are they paying attention, or whether they see Johnston as, the latest iteration of the Hancock era.
Sage.
Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting to see immigration at the top of the list and the money going towards this migrant crisis. And I'll put on my conservative hat for a minute, but I think that it's important to understand that when people have these concerns, it's not because they don't believe that migrants should be treated with respect or that we should be allowing them to stay in the country. It's a question of we have limited resources. The city of Denver has a host of issues to solve, everything from homelessness to crime to infrastructure. And all of these issues seem to get pushed to the side to deal with issues like this. That's kind of what the budget crisis we're in right now, it's a big part of it. And I think that it's important to understand that if we're seeing that in Denver, you're seeing it in cities like New York City, places that are pretty far away from the border where these things are occurring, this can really have an effect on elections. It's hard to say how much, but as primaries come around and you get Democrats who are willing to say, hey, we've got to crack down on this, we've got to do something, you might see that really start to have an effect in future elections. We'll see if it continues to be the same issue that it is, but as long as the border crisis doesn't get solved, it seems like cities like Denver are going to take the brunt of it, and it's going to be on the taxpayers' dime.
Patty.
Well, first, condolences to Mayor Mike Johnston.
Yes.
Not for this rating, but because he lost his mother last week. So our heart goes out to him on that. I'm sure that this was a relatively easy blow to weather. Who thinks they're popular right now if they're a politician? If you look at the comments that are posted about immigration, about what's happening in Denver, the narrative isn't great. But on the other hand, there are still people who really love this city. I think most people still really love this city. They want to make it better. They're torn on the immigration issue right now because the city always votes to help people and votes for tax increases to help people. But right now they're saying they're not getting their composting bin, they're not getting their streets swept, they're not getting their pothole fixed. But I think it will swing back. The irony in this poll commissioned by City Council was that City Council came out much lower than Mayor Johnston.
Eric.
First, I echo Patty in terms of condolences
Yes.
to Mayor Johnston and his family. I had the pleasure of spending time with his mom, Sally, on a few occasions. Definitely a loss. The number in the poll that struck me the most is not even the ratings of the mayor or city council. It was the right direction, wrong track number, and with a significant majority of Denverites indicating they thought the city was on the wrong track. This is a progressive, liberal-minded town, and they are willing to invest and support homeless services, migrant services, but it comes with a big but. And the but is they want the things they care about also taken care of, whether it's that the parks are mowed, the dandelions are dealt with, the rec centers are open, Patty referenced the compost bins. You can run the list of basic city services that people want and expect. And if those services are being met, fine, then let's invest all this other money. But in this case, we're investing all this other money and not taking care of many of those services, and that is the rub.
Let's talk about the election year that is upon us. This is a year where people are voting on emotion, as Sage was saying earlier. A poll in March found all Colorado voters, not just people in Denver, are very concerned about the direction of our entire state. Sage, there are going to be so many issues, including social issues, that are before us in November. And right now, all the people behind the various plans are trying to get all the signatures and make sure their ideas are on the ballot for consideration.
Yeah, this election is going to be, I mean, there's no other way of putting it. It's going to be absolutely crazy. It's going from the presidential on down. It is going to be very emotional, and it's going to be emotional post-election as well. I mean, you can just imagine what's going to happen if Donald Trump wins the presidency again in the city streets of Denver. You can imagine what could happen again if he loses again with his supporters. What will they do next? Will we see another January 6th? I hope not, knock on wood. With that being said, yeah, I mean, on actual ballot measures we could see, we have, abortion, we have taxes, we have very, very critical and important issues. I'm interested to see, honestly, how much of it is overshadowed by the presidential election. I mean, the news cycle, and those who work in journalism can tell you there's not enough reporters to cover the amount of stuff that goes on. The presidential election, the amount of things that are going to come out of that is going to, I think, consume airwaves for the foreseeable future. And for someone who, appreciates policy debate and discussion, that's not a great thing, because a lot of it's going to be on rhetoric and character assassination and whatever comes out of the mouths of either of the candidates, for that matter. But I think it'll be fascinating to see these issues, how much they're talked about as we get heavier and heavier into the presidential election, how much people are paying attention to them. Of course, voters, when they get their ballot, they're going to be forced to. But how much of the news stories and things like that are going to be covering, property taxes in October? I don't know. We'll see. But I'm interested to see how much of those issues kind of get shoved to the side because of the presidential.
Well, we will mention them here on
Absolutely.
this show because that ballot is going to be long.
Colorado is one of the most liberal states for allowing citizens to put initiatives on the ballot. And of course, when I say it's one of the most liberal, many of those are conservative measures too, but it's just Colorado respects its citizens and lets them weigh in too. It was interesting, the Chamber of Commerce had a lunch last week where they polled people in that room, Chamber of Commerce, on how they felt about citizen initiatives. Not surprisingly, not very many people liked them. There was a statewide poll done a little bit earlier where the state says, we like this. Coloradans like to weigh in. The challenge this year is going to be how to educate yourself about these ballot measures. Because as Sage said, the bandwidth in the media is going to be taken up with the sexy stories about the candidates. The measures are not as easy to discuss, but every voter should be prepared to really study so that if there's a wolves backlash, they know they actually considered the issues. And there are going to be, at least a dozen really tricky issues on this ballot.
Mm-hmm. Eric?
I don't have a ton new to add. What Patty references is really what's known as direct democracy, and it's part of the frontier mentality, Colorado being a frontier state way back in the 1800s. And when you look at the right of initiative, the right of citizen initiative, that's not exclusive to Western states, but it is much more prominent in the Western U.S. than it is across the Eastern Seaboard and elsewhere. And yes, some of the elites here, and I can imagine a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, don't think that kindly of the practice, but it is not going away anytime soon. The voters of the state like that. The Blue Book is going to be very important, and it's going to be important for voters not just to tune in to TV ads, but to tune in to other sources of information and study this and get it right.
One of those issues will be a ballot measure to, you mentioned this, but enshrine abortion in the state's constitution. My colleague Esteban Hernandez wrote a story about how that issue is expected to really turn out the Latino vote. Latinos could shape this election in a few ways. They make up about 15% of the state's voting bloc, we heard from one expert. So we heard that, obviously protecting access to abortion is a top issue for Latinos. Another is climate change, lowering inflation, gun violence, and job opportunities. It's not unprecedented for the Latino voting bloc to really shape the election. We saw it in 2022 in the CD8 race with U.S. Rep. Caraveo, who was elected as the first Latina from Colorado to win a seat in Congress, in large part because of the Latino voting bloc supporting her. So she's obviously running for re-election again, and we'll be curious to see if they help her keep her position.
Okay, now let's go down the row and have everyone talk about highs and lows of the week. There were many on each side. Patty, let's start with you and something that was a disappointment.
I think it's good that the governor did take action, was willing to say no to some bills. I wish he'd extended that putting on the brakes to the EPA air issue, which is why we're going to suddenly see gas that's already increasing increase so much more at the pumps.
50 cents, maybe up to $1.
Right.
We'll see.
Well, ditto that, and I think the political consequences of that could be interesting to follow this summer. But to Donald Trump's social media feed, quote-unquote unified Reich, referring obviously to the Third Reich, and whether the former president posted that himself or was some rogue staffer, you have to ask what kind of a rogue staffer would be attracted to work for Donald Trump, and why would the former president have such a person in his contingent anyway?
Alayna?
I wrote an alarming story earlier this week about road rage shootings in Colorado surging, and this data was it stopped me in my tracks. So in 2014, the rate per million people was 0.19, that's in 2014, and that's risen to 2.9. So well above the national average of 1.4. It's another sign our streets are getting deadlier, on top of the crazy traffic fatalities that we're seeing just go up and up and up. And it really reflects an increase in gun violence in the state.
That's disturbing. It really kind of puts into perspective angry drivers on the road. Be careful. My disappointment is something that's kind of small. There was a story that came out, I think just yesterday. Samuel Alito, who the Supreme Court Justice has been under fire for, I guess, him or his wife flew the American flag upside down. Well, apparently on another one of his properties, he was flying what is known as the pine tree flag, or an appeal to heaven flag, which is a Revolutionary War flag commissioned by George Washington. I was a little bit disappointed in the reporting on this national reporting. CNN started the story by saying, quote, a flag that was on display during the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. You can see where it's going with that. I'm a big history buff. I love old flags. This flag is part of American history. It was around in the Revolutionary War, commissioned by George Washington. I don't appreciate flags being, basically taken out of commission. No one can use them or display them anymore because I'll refrain from using some of the words I'd like to. People who were there on January 6th did. The American flag was used by them too. I don't think that's a right. We don't have the right to say that flag can no longer be flown. So that was disappointing for me to see.
Okay. Now let's talk about something positive.
This Memorial Day is a great time to go look at Riverside Cemetery. We did a front page story on it this week because even though it's getting very brown, there is hope that it is a new way of running cemeteries without having to use too much water, but dealing with the environment. So actually our reporter went out worried about it and came back hopeful.
Okay, good. And that's a fascinating cemetery.
It's a beautiful place, large open space just north of here.
Well, neither the Avalanche or the Nuggets season ended quite like most people around here wished, but I still, it was a good run. One team won the Stanley Cup 2 seasons ago. The other won the NBA championship a year ago. That's not to be repeated this year, but they both acquit themselves very well and provided good entertainment. And now it's to watch the dismal Rockies.
Eric. Okay.
And the DU lacrosse team. They're going
Of
to the
course.
championship. Yeah.
Of course.
They're our beacon of hope right
Yes,
now.
Final Four, yes.
I'm an animal lover, so I'm really excited about this. The Denver Zoo this weekend is unveiling a new habitat called Down Under. It's its first immersive habitat ever, so you can walk alongside wallabies and other species from Australia. And it's apparently their biggest project since they created the elephant enclosure in 2012, so I will be going to see that soon.
Oh, yes, and the kangaroos.
Yeah.
Yes.
So mine was actually getting a chance to meet one of my childhood heroes, Lemony Snicket, the author of The Series of Unfortunate Events, which is my favorite books. His real name is Daniel Handler. Boulder Bookstore put on a little event in Boulder, and where he actually made some quips about there not being any chance of any conservatives being in the audience, so I got to tell him that he was wrong on that. But it was a great opportunity to get a chance to meet someone who I idolized and whose books brought me a lot of joy, especially during a childhood that was relatively rough. So I was glad to get a chance to meet him and say thank you.
But he's so quirky, so it's so fitting that you are a big fan.
Yes, he was, and he was just, it was a lot of fun during the little talk he had.
Yeah, no, he is good. All right, my positive is the return this weekend of the iconic Denver band Opie Gone Bad. This girl who moved here in the 90s would go see them, stand outside Herman Highway for hours on Saturday nights. And now they're getting back together this Saturday for a one-time show. This reunion show will then have, 2 days later, lead singer Jake Schroeder is headed back to Normandy, France, where he lives part-time now, and he runs a leadership program for underserved students who go over to Normandy to learn about leadership based on the heroes of D-Day. Very, very cool. So with that, I'd like to wish everyone a good Memorial Day weekend to everybody and extend all of our appreciation to those fallen military men and women who lost their lives in service to us and our country. Thank you, panel, for joining us this week. Thank you for making us a part of your weekend as well, or listening to the podcast if you're not catching us on TV. I'm Kyle Dyer, and I'll see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.